I think most of you know I used to teach. For a few years, I was called away to teach in northeastern Pennsylvania, second graders. The city was called Hazleton. If you look on a map, it's right where Interstates 80 and 81 cross. It's kind of a depressed area. It's an old coal mining town. It had its heyday long ago. Well, that's where I was called, to teach second grade. And the stories I could tell. Now, northeastern Pennsylvania is quite a bit different than Southern California. Bit of a culture shock for a 30-year-old and his 26-year-old bride. Two little girls moving across the country to start teaching, especially the winter, right? So, as you know, second graders are curious folk. They're a lot like adults in a lot of ways. They're different as well. So they each have their own unique desires, like we do. Personalities, mannerisms, traits. They gravitate towards certain groups of classmates and they avoid others. They lose their tempers. They become impatient with each other. They judge others and point out their faults. They gossip. They're different from grown-ups in this, though. They have not yet learned discretion. So all that stuff I just mentioned is pretty out in the open. One day in the middle of the school year, actually toward the first part of the school year, a second grade boy ran up to me panting, red in his face with urgency, obviously upset. He grabbed my arm and he pointed at a boy across the room and he said, "He hit me." Well, don't we grown-ups tend to do the same thing? Only we use discretion. We don't run, for one thing, and we hide our redness. There's not that kind of urgency. We're not so bold as to grab an authority figure by the arm. We know better. We use other, subtler means of communicating. But I think, like second graders, we do seek someone who will listen. Someone who will take our side, whether it's gossip in a parking lot or a courtroom drama or anywhere in between. Just like second graders, we want to point in someone else's direction and shout out judgments against them. So what I wanted to say in this situation, the boy ran up to me, he tugged on my shirt sleeve. What I wanted to say was, well, you probably deserved it. I didn't, but I wanted to. Because I knew I wasn't hearing the whole side, the whole story, right? You're hearing one side when this kind of thing happens. What would the other boy say if I asked him? So, the first boy's only telling me, part of the story. I think this is like us too. It's hardwired into humanity. I don't think it matters what culture we're in or what age we are. We think of ourselves naturally before we think of others. It's very easy for us to put ourselves first, even when we tell ourselves we're putting others first. It's very easy for us to see the speck in somebody else's eye when there's a 2x4 sticking out of our eye, right? We're especially good critics of others. We're not really good critics of ourselves. Well, in today's gospel, Jesus says a word to his opponents that I believe the first time it ever recorded in literature is in the Gospel of Mark. Hypocrites. Some scholars think that Jesus even may have coined the term. He calls his opponents hypocrites. This isn't a compliment. So it's worthy of a little bit of word study, an interesting etymology. What does this word mean? Well, the noun in Greek is hypokrisis. You can think of it in two parts. Hypo and crisis. We get our English words from that. And it really means the acting out of a theatrical part, but it's different than like an actor. An actor acts a theatrical part, but before we start calling, for instance, Tom Cruise a hypocrite, the meaning here is more like the character the actor plays and not the actor himself. So if anything, it's not Tom Cruise who's the hypocrite, it's Ethan Hunt, the character he plays, who would be the hypocrite. What? Yeah, it is. It's a little confusing. So let's get into a little more. There's a verb form of this word. Hupoprenesthai gives us a little bit more insight. That means to play a part or to pretend. It's the action that the actor does that is the focus here. In Mission Impossible, the actor, Tom Cruise, pretends to be Ethan Hunt. His actions in the movie do not belong to him so much as they belong to the character. So take it one step further, we go back to the noun hypokrisis. I mentioned hypo, that's a prefix in English that means below or beneath, like hypothyroidism, a thyroid functioning below normal standards. Crisis, the Greek translation would be judgment or decision. So we put it all together and there's this kind of judging below. One person deciding that another is beneath him, or that one person deciding he's better than someone else. Except the person who comes out on top is actually a fake. To return to our actor analogy, Ethan Hunt becomes the reality, whereas Tom Cruise fades into the shadows. Hardly worth Ethan's time. That's what this word hypocrite is trying to catch. Reality has been turned over on its head. Inauthenticity has overshadowed authenticity. Somehow, when no one noticed, someone took the real, genuine Picasso and replaced it with a fake. Jesus knew this. Which is why in today's gospel he calls his opponents hypocrites. Whether or not anyone else had noticed, they're pretenders. They're fakes who are judging themselves above others, who actually value their inauthenticity above the authenticity of the disciples. It's the negation. Hypocrisy is like the negation of authenticity. So we've come to a contrast. On the one hand, hypocrisy, living a pretend life. On the other hand, authenticity, living an honest life. We can think of these as a spectrum, poles on the spectrum, completely pretend, completely authentic. None of us is on these poles. We're all somewhere in the middle. So I wonder, what would it look like for us to live more towards this pole? To live truly authentic lives, free of hypocrisy, not pretending to be someone we're not. It's a hard thing to do. But what would it look like? Well, I want to return to those second graders. Remember that boy who came up and tugged my shirt sleeve, and I wanted to say, well, you probably deserved it. What I did instead was use it as a teaching moment. We were in a gym, and I said, class, line up, recess is over. So they all lined up, kind of looking at me like, okay, this is true, I don't know what you're doing, but we'll line up. And then some minutes later, we're in the classroom, and this was a private Christian school, so I could do this. I said, get out your Bibles. And it was predictable. I said, open to Matthew 18:15, and the first one there gets to read it. The predictable part was the boy who was red-faced is always the first one there to read it. So I figured he'd be at least one of the top 2 or 3. And sure enough, he opened it, raised his hand, with another urgency, right? And I said, Brent, I see you're there. Why don't you begin reading? And he did, from the New International Reader's Version, the Nerve, which I always laugh at, but he says this, if your brother or sister sins against you, go to them. Keep it between the 2 of you. I interrupted, wait, what did that say? Please, Brent, read it again. Slow down a bit, I want everybody to hear. So he did, he read it again, and then he kept going. If they listen to you, you've won them back. But what if they won't listen to you? Then take 1 or 2 others with you. Thank you, Brent, I said. And I addressed the whole class. You know what this is? This is the Bible's remedy for tattletaling. They all looked at me with this confused look on their face. I paused a little for effect and then went on. Don't you all think it would be a good idea if instead of running to a teacher right away to tell on somebody, you actually went to that person and talked to them, tried to work it out between the 2 of you? And I heard feet shuffling and a little bit of a mutter. They weren't bewildered now. They knew what I was getting at. And we decided to take on a kind of class project. I I don't know, call it social studies, but a class experiment, class project where we were going to do this. If a student came to me to tell on somebody, I was going to say, I'm not going to listen until you talk to that person first. Okay, Mr. True. And at first it was hard, but we agreed to this. It was hard, but we stuck at it. We worked at it. Before the year was over, here's some things that happened. Students, a spectrum, they didn't go all the way over here, but they moved towards it. They learned to let things go that weren't really that important after all. They gave each other the benefit of the doubt. They became less quick at passing judgments on each other and in thinking of themselves better than everybody else around them. Some specifics, they didn't tell on each other as frequently. They didn't lose their tempers as quickly. They stopped cutting in line to the drinking fountain. Even better, I watched them begin to transgress some of those imagined social barriers we put up. I don't know if you've ever been in the northeastern part of the country, but in Hazleton, there was an Italian part of town and there was a Puerto Rican part of town, and they did not mix. I watched one of the Italian girls begin to eat lunch with some of the Puerto Rican girls. They became fast friends before the year was over. And that's a big deal. I saw boys eat lunch with girls and girls with boys. Cooties disappeared. That's neat stuff. Well, isn't this what authenticity is all about? Honesty, giving each other the benefit of the doubt, not judging ourselves to be better than those around us. Well, I don't know about you, but I want to be a lot like these second